The words hit like a fist wrapped in velvet, soft enough to pass as a joke, hard enough to leave bruises no one could see. "Hey, Maya, nice bag," Connor drawled from his desk in the back row, lips curling into that practice smirk he perfected over 4 years at Riverside High. "Is that genuine dirty black leather, or did you just dig it out of a dumpster?" The classroom erupted in snickers, a chorus of cruelty that made Maya's stomach clench. She kept her eyes on her textbook, fingers gripping the edges until her knuckles turned pale. The bag in question, a worn but clean backpack her grandmother had given her before she passed, sat at her feet like evidence of some unspoken crime. Mr. Henderson didn't even look up from his lesson plan, his silence a kind of permission that made the laughter grow bolder. Maya had learned long ago that teachers rarely intervened in the small violences that defined her days, the ones that left no marks, no proof, nothing but the slow erosion of her sense of belonging. She'd been the target since freshman year, when she'd arrived at Riverside from the predominantly black neighborhood across the river, one of only 12 black students in a school of 800. Her existence seemed to offend Connor and his circle, Brittany with her ice blonde ponytail, Jake with his football jersey, and Melissa, who filmed everything on her phone like she was documenting some anthropological study. They never used slurs outright, nothing that would get them suspended, but their words carried the weight of them, dressed up in plausible deniability. "I'm just joking," Connor would say if anyone challenged him, throwing up his hands in mock innocence. "Why is she so sensitive?" The bell rang, releasing the class into the chaos of the hallway, and Maya gathered her things with the careful efficiency of someone trying to become invisible. She moved through the crowds like water, finding the path of least resistance, avoiding eye contact, keeping her head down, counting the steps to her locker. 53 steps. She'd memorized the route, along with every potential ambush point, every corner where Connor's crew might be waiting. Today, they caught her at locker 147, Brittany materializing at her elbow with that fake sweet smile that made Maya's skin crawl. "Maya, sweetie, did you hear about the field trip?" Brittany's voice dripped with false concern, loud enough to draw a small audience. "We're going to the nature preserve next week. You know, the one with the swamp walk? I hope you're not scared of getting your nice clothes dirty." The emphasis on nice landed like a slap, and Brittany's eyes swept over Maya's faded jeans and thrift store sweater with theatrical pity. Jake appeared behind her, grinning. "Yeah, I heard they've got alligators out there. Maybe some crocodiles, too. You ever seen one up close, Maya?" His tone suggested she belonged among them, something primitive and dangerous, something that didn't fit within the clean, orderly walls of Riverside High. Maya slammed her locker shut, the metal clang echoing down the hallway. "I'm not going," she said quietly, the words costing her more than anyone would ever know. She'd been looking forward to the trip for weeks, had saved up the permission slip money from her part-time job at the grocery store, had imagined walking through the cypress trees and seeing the rare birds her grandmother had told her about in stories. But the thought of being trapped in the wilderness with Connor and his friends, far from teachers and witnesses, made her chest tighten with a fear she couldn't name. Brittany's smile widened. "Aw, that's too bad. Guess some people just don't have what it takes for adventure." She flounced away, Melissa's phone camera trained on Maya's face, capturing her humiliation for whatever social media mockery they had planned next. Maya made it to the bathroom before the tears came, locking herself in the farthest stall and pressing her forehead against the cool metal door. She'd tried everything, ignoring them, confronting them, reporting them to counselors who nodded sympathetically and did nothing. Her mother had marched into the principal's office twice last year, but nothing changed except that the bullying got more subtle, more carefully worded, harder to prove. "Just keep your head down and graduate," her mother had finally said, exhausted from fighting battles that never seemed to end. 8 more months, baby. Then You're free. But 8 months felt like a lifetime when every day was a minefield of small cruelties. When her classmates treated her like an intruder in a space that should have been hers by right. Maya had begun to feel like a ghost in her own life, present but not really seen. Her voice swallowed by the weight of their contempt. She wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and walked out of the bathroom with the careful mask she'd learned to wear, expressionless, unreachable, armored against the next attack. The field trip permission slip burned in Maya's backpack for 3 days before she finally made her decision. She'd changed her mind a dozen times, cycling through scenarios that ranged from optimistic to catastrophic. But in the end, it was her grandmother's voice that pushed her forward. "Don't let small minds make you smaller, baby girl," Grandma Rose had told her once. Hands gentle on Maya's braids, eyes fierce with the kind of wisdom that came from surviving her own battles. "You take up space. You claim your place. That's how we win." So Maya forged her mother's signature, a small act of rebellion that made her hands shake, and turned in the slip on Friday morning, ignoring the surprise that flickered across Miss Patterson's face when she handed it over. The biology teacher was one of the few staff members who seemed to genuinely care, who pulled Maya aside once to tell her she had the highest test scores in the class, who'd encouraged her to apply for the science scholarship that could change her life. "I'm glad you're coming, Maya," Miss Patterson said quietly, and the words felt like a lifeline Maya hadn't known she needed. The following Tuesday dawned gray and humid, the kind of spring morning that promised rain but never quite delivered. Maya dressed in layers jeans, hiking boots she'd bought secondhand, a long-sleeve shirt to ward off mosquitoes, and packed water bottles, granola bars, and the field journal Miss Patterson had assigned. She told her mother she was going to the library, hating the lie but knowing her mother would worry herself sick if she knew the truth. The bus ride to Cypress Hollow Nature Preserve was exactly as uncomfortable as Maya had anticipated. Connor and his friends claimed the back rows, their laughter and crude jokes filling the air like poisonous gas, while Maya sat near the front, earbuds in, pretending to be absorbed in her phone. Miss Patterson sat across the aisle, occasionally glancing back at her students with the weary vigilance of someone who knew trouble when she saw it brewing. The preserve itself was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that made Maya's breath catch despite her anxiety. Ancient cypress trees rose from dark water, their roots creating labyrinthine passages draped in Spanish moss. The air hummed with insect life, and somewhere in the distance, a heron called out in a voice that sounded almost human. The class clustered around the ranger station, while a weathered man named Mr. Daniels, Park Ranger Daniels, his badge read, gave them the safety briefing. "Stay on the marked trails," he warned, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen what happened when people didn't listen. "The boardwalk is safe, but step off into the swamp and you're in gator territory. We've got American alligators out here, some of them 12 feet long, and they're not friendly. Respect the wildlife, respect the water, and nobody gets hurt." Kana made a show of looking directly at Maya during the alligator warning, miming snapping jaws with his hands, and Jake snorted with laughter. Miss Patterson shot them a sharp look. But the damage was done, the message received. Maya felt the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. But she forced herself to focus on the ranger's words, on the beauty of the landscape, on anything except the boys who seemed determined to poison every moment of her life. The class split into smaller groups as they headed out onto the boardwalk, a narrow wooden path that wound through the heart of the swamp. Ms. Patterson led the first group, which included Maya and a handful of quieter students who actually seemed interested in the ecology lesson. They identified birds, a great egret, a wood duck, an osprey circling overhead, and examined the distinctive knees of the cypress trees, the way the roots adapted to standing water. For a brief golden hour, Maya forgot about Connor and his crew, lost in the wonder of a place that felt ancient and sacred, indifferent to human cruelty. Then Miss Patterson's radio crackled with a call from the ranger station. "I need to head back," she told the group, apologetic. "There's an issue with the other bus. You all stay here on the boardwalk, okay? Don't wander off. I'll be back in 20 minutes. The moment she disappeared around the bend, the atmosphere shifted. Connor's group emerged from a side trail, moving with the predatory confidence of wolves spotting isolated prey. Brittany's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Well, look who decided to join us in nature," she purred, blocking the boardwalk ahead, while Jake and Melissa flanked Maya from behind. "Feeling brave today, Maya? Or just stupid?" Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "Let me pass." Connor stepped forward, close enough that she could smell the energy drink on his breath. The boardwalk railing was rougher than it looked, splinters digging into Maya's palms as Connor forced her against it, his grip iron tight on her arms. Below, the swamp water churned slightly, disturbed by something large moving just beneath the surface. Maya's rational mind screamed that this couldn't be happening, that they wouldn't actually hurt her. But the look in Connor's eyes told a different story. This was a boy who'd been told, his whole life, that he could do whatever he wanted, that the world would bend to accommodate him. The consequences were for other people. "Please," Maya heard herself say, hating the tremor in her voice but unable to stop it. "Don't do this." Brittany laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, now she begs. Isn't that precious?" She turned to Melissa, whose phone camera never wavered. "Make sure you get this. I want everyone to see what happens when people forget their place." Jake had already dumped the contents of Maya's backpack into the Water Her Field journal. The water bottles, the granola bars she'd packed, all of it sinking into the dark water or floating away on the sluggish current. The casual destruction of her things felt almost worse than the physical threat, a message that nothing she valued was safe, that they could take everything from her and call it a joke. "The thing about alligators," Connor said, still gripping Maya's arms, still forcing her to lean over the railing at an angle that made her stomach lurch, "is that they're ambush predators. They wait in the water, real patient, and then—" he made a sudden snapping motion that made Maya flinch. "They drag you under before you even know what hit you." Fitting, don't you think? For someone who keeps lurking around where she doesn't belong? The wood creaked ominously beneath them, old and water-damaged. And for a terrifying moment, Maya thought the railing might give way entirely, sending her plummeting into the swamp, whether Connor intended it or not. But he pulled back slightly, not out of mercy, but to prolong the moment, to savor her fear like some kind of sick trophy. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "You're going to transfer to another school. Tell your mom you hate it here. Tell her the academics aren't good enough. Tell her whatever you want. But you're leaving Riverside, and you're never coming back. Because if you don't—" he leaned in close, breath hot against her ear. "Next time there won't be a boardwalk. Next time we'll make sure you actually go for a swim. Understand?" Maya's mind raced through her options, each one bleaker than the last. She could scream, but they were far enough from the main group that no one would hear over the sounds of the swamp. She could fight, but Jake was twice her size, and Brittany looked like she'd enjoy the excuse to hurt him more. She could agree to Connor's demands, but even through her fear, she knew that wouldn't stop them. Bullies never stopped. They just got bolder. So she did the only thing she could think of. She went limp. Not dramatically, not like fainting in a Victorian novel, but with the sudden dead weight of someone who decided to stop cooperating with her own terrorization. Connor, caught off guard by the shift, lost his grip, and Maya twisted away from the railing, dropping to her hands and knees on the boardwalk. For a split second, they all froze, surprise giving her the opening she needed. Maya scrambled forward, not toward the main path where they could easily catch her, but toward the side trail Ms. Patterson had warned them about earlier. The one that branched off into the deeper swamp where the boardwalk ended and the real wilderness began. "Get her!" Jake's voice rang out behind her, followed by the thunder of footsteps on wood. But Maya had already reached the trail's end, had already made the desperate decision that changed everything. She jumped. The water hit her like a wall of cold shock, murky and thick with vegetation, filling her mouth and nose before she could fully process what she'd done. For a moment, panic overwhelmed everything else. The absolute wrongness of being submerged in a place that was not meant for humans, where things with teeth and ancient instincts waited in the dark. But then her feet found purchase on the muddy bottom, solid enough to stand if she didn't think too hard about what she was standing on, and her head broke the surface. She could hear Connor and the others on the boardwalk above, shouting at each other, their voices carrying clear across the water. Did she actually jump? Brittany sounded shocked, maybe even frightened, as if she'd just realized this had gone too far. Is she crazy? Melissa's phone was still up, still filming, and Maya felt a bitter surge of satisfaction knowing that they'd just documented their own crime. But that satisfaction died quickly as she registered the shapes moving in the water around her long, dark shadows that could have been logs but weren't, that moved with a purpose logs definitely didn't have. American alligators, Ranger Daniels had said, some of them 12 feet long. Maya's grandmother had told her stories about gators, about how they were patient hunters, how they watched and waited and struck when you least expected it. "Grandma," Maya whispered to herself, water lapping at her chin as she tried to move as little as possible. "I could really use some of that wisdom right about now." Above her, Connor was yelling something about calling for help, his voice carrying an edge of panic that suggested he'd just realized he might actually be in serious trouble. Jake and Brittany were arguing, their words overlapping in a chaos that made it clear they had no plan for what came after terrorizing her. Only Melissa remained silent, phone still raised, camera still rolling. Maya didn't wait to hear more. Moving with agonizing slowness, she began to wade toward the far bank, toward a section of solid ground she could see through the cypress trees. Every step was a negotiation with fear. The water was chest-deep here, hiding everything below, and her boots sank into mud that tried to hold her in place. Something brushed against her leg, smooth and muscular, and she bit down on a scream that would have used up precious air and energy. She thought about her grandmother, about all the times Grandma Rose had faced down threats with that calm, unshakable dignity that made powerful people uncomfortable. "You're a survivor, baby girl," she'd said during one of their last conversations, before the cancer took her voice and then her life. Survivors do what they have to do. No shame in that. So Maya survived. She made it to the far bank, hands grabbing at exposed roots, pulling herself up onto a small island of mud and grass that probably disappeared entirely during flood season. Behind her, the commotion on the boardwalk had attracted attention. She could hear Miss Patterson's voice now, sharp with alarm, and Ranger Daniels responding with the controlled urgency of someone trained for emergencies. But Maya didn't call out to them, didn't signal her location, because something else had caught her attention. There, wedged between two cypress knees at the waterline, was a metal case dented, covered in algae, secured with a rusted padlock that had long since corroded through. Maya pulled it free, her hands shaking from cold and adrenaline, and pried it open. Inside the metal case, protected by layers of plastic wrap, gone cloudy with age, were photographs. Dozens of them. Instant camera prints that had faded, but not enough to obscure their contents. Maya's hands trembled as she sorted through them, her waterlogged brain struggling to process what she was seeing, because these weren't nature photos or family snapshots. They were evidence. The first photo showed Connor, younger by several years, standing beside a man who looked like an older version of him, same sharp jawline, same entitled smirk. They were in what looked like a warehouse, surrounded by boxes marked with pharmaceutical symbols. The man's hand rested on Connor's shoulder, in a pose that might have looked paternal if not for the stacks of cash visible on the table behind them. Other photos showed different people, different locations, but the same theme: money, pills, exchanges that were clearly illegal. Maya recognized some faces: members of the town council, local business owners, even a police officer she'd seen around Riverside. And in nearly every photo, somewhere in the frame, was Connor's father, Richard Morrison, owner of Morrison Development Corporation, respected community leader, and apparently the center of some kind of drug distribution ring. The final photo made Maya's breath catch. It showed a woman she didn't recognize, but the inscription on the back, written in shaky handwriting, told her enough. Sarah Chun, Riverside High Counselor, tried to report Morrison. Car accident, Rut Mine, March 2019. No accident. Maya's mind raced, connecting dots she'd never thought to look for. Miss Chun had been the counselor before Mr. Brooks, the one person who'd actually tried to help students like Maya, who'd stood up to parents and administration when needed. And she died in a single car crash that everyone had written off as tragic bad luck, her car sliding off a rain-slicked road into a ravine. Not an accident. Murder. Maya sealed the photos back into the case, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. This was bigger than bullying, bigger than Connor's personal vendetta against her. This was corruption that reached into every corner of Riverside, that protected people like Connor because exposing him would expose all of them. And Maya was the only person who knew about it, alone in a swamp with predators both human and reptilian closing in. Behind her, she heard splashing. Someone had entered the water, probably one of the rangers organized to search for her. Above, a helicopter's distant thrum suggested they'd called in serious backup. Maya knew she should signal them, should end this nightmare and get to safety. But something held her back. If she surfaced now, if she handed this evidence to the authorities, what would happen? Would they believe her? Or would the Morrisons' influence bury the truth along with her? Would she become another accident, another inconvenient witness who mysteriously disappeared? The swamp around her seemed to pulse with secrets, ancient and patient, offering no answers. An alligator surfaced 30 feet away, just its eyes and snout visible above the waterline, watching her with the timeless patience of an apex predator. Maya met its gaze, feeling a strange kinship with this creature that survived by knowing when to strike and when to wait. Not yet, she whispered to herself, to the alligator, to her grandmother's memory. Not yet. She wrapped the metal case in her jacket, securing it as best she could, and began to move along the small island toward deeper cover. The cypress trees grew thick here, their roots creating a maze of hiding spots, and the vegetation was dense enough to conceal her from aerial searches. Maya knew the rangers would find her eventually. They were trained professionals with equipment and experience, but she needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to use what she'd found without getting herself killed. The water rippled as something large moved beneath the surface, and Maya froze, every muscle tensed, ready to fight or flee depending on what emerged. But the ripples passed, the danger subsiding, leaving her alone again with her racing thoughts and the damning evidence clutched against her chest. Above, she heard Miss Patterson calling her name, voice ragged with worry, and the sound almost broke Maya's resolve. But then she heard Connor's voice too, playing the concerned classmate perfectly. I tried to stop her, I swear. She just jumped in. I think she might have done it on purpose, you know? She'd been really unstable lately. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that Maya felt ice crystallize in her veins. This was what they did. Who they were: people who could terrorize someone and then paint themselves as heroes, who could push you off a cliff and then mourn at your funeral. People who never face consequences because the system was designed to protect them. Well, Maya thought, adjusting her grip on the metal case, maybe it was time to change the system. She found a hollow in the base of an ancient cypress, a space just large enough for her to wedge herself and the evidence, hidden from casual view but accessible if she needed to move quickly. The water lapped at her feet, cold and dark, and somewhere nearby that alligator was still watching, still waiting. Maya closed her eyes, let herself shiver from cold and delayed shock, and began to formulate a plan. Because her grandmother had taught her one final lesson, the most important one: survivors don't just endure, they win. And Maya Shantamas, named for her grandmother and a murdered counselor she'd never met, was done just surviving. It was time to win. The search intensified as afternoon bled into early evening. Helicopters crisscrossing the sky, while boats with searchlights probed the darker channels of the swamp. Maya stayed hidden in her cypress hollow, watching the organized chaos unfold around her. Every so often, she'd hear her name called out across the water, Ms. Patterson's voice increasingly desperate, Ranger Daniels coordinating teams with military precision. Once, a boat passed so close she could have reached out and touched it, but she pressed herself deeper into the shadows and stayed silent. She used the time to examine the photos more carefully, to piece together a timeline that made her blood run cold. The operation had apparently been running for at least 5 years, using Morrison Development Corporation's construction sites as distribution points. Prescription opioids, mostly OxyContin, Vicodin, fentanyl sold to dealers, who then flooded not just Riverside, but the entire Tri-County area. The death toll, Maya realized with growing horror, must have been staggering. How many overdoses? How many destroyed families? How many lives ruined? Also, Richard Morrison could pad his already substantial fortune. And Connor knew. The photos proved it. He'd been initiated into his father's criminal enterprise while he was still in middle school. Taught to see other people as either assets or obstacles. Their lives meaningless compared to the Morrison family's profit margin. No wonder he treated Maya like trash in his worldview. She was trash. Just another disposable person from the wrong side of town whose suffering didn't matter. The rage that filled Maya then was clean and focused, sharpening her thoughts rather than clouding them. She'd spent years trying to shrink herself, to avoid confrontation, to survive by being invisible. But invisibility hadn't saved Miss Chun, and it wouldn't save her either. The only way forward was through the fear, through the system designed to protect people like the Morrisons, through the swamp itself if necessary. As darkness began to settle over the preserve, the search crews started to pull back. Maya heard Ranger Daniels ordering everyone to the ranger station, could hear the subtext in his voice. They were transitioning from rescue to recovery, from saving a living girl to finding a body. Connor and his friends had given statements, no doubt painting themselves as innocent witnesses to Maya's mental breakdown. Ms. Patterson would be blamed for inadequate supervision. And by morning, the story would be set in stone. Troubled black girl from poor neighborhood. Couldn't handle the pressure, tragic accident, so very sad. Maya waited until the last searcher had disappeared around the bend, until the helicopter's distant thrum had faded to nothing, and then she moved. Not back toward the ranger station and the people who'd never believe her anyway, but deeper into the swamp, following the natural channels that Ranger Daniels had marked on his safety map as advanced trails only. She'd studied that map while everyone else was joking around, had memorized the routes and landmarks because knowledge was armor in a world that wanted her defenseless. The night swamp was a